They thought I'd die soon, so they drained $127,000 from my account. My daughter-in-law laughed and said, "We needed it more than you do." But here's what they didn't know. I spent 30 years as a detective with the Philadelphia Police Department, specializing in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. In chess, they thought I was just an old king, weak and ready for checkmate. But I was actually castling, making a tactical move to protect my most valuable pieces while positioning myself for a counterattack they never saw coming. This story has more twists than a magician's deck of cards. And if you've ever felt betrayed by family or worried about being taken advantage of as you age, stick around because justice is coming in ways that will surprise everyone involved. If this resonates with you, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. We're building a community of people who refuse to be taken advantage of, no matter who's doing the taking. My name is Christian Morris, and at 65, I thought my biggest worry would be learning to live alone after losing the love of my life. My wife Margaret died 14 months ago after a brutal 18-month fight with pancreatic cancer, and I'd been slowly figuring out this new reality of widowhood. We'd been married 38 years. She was my anchor, my voice of reason, the person who organized family gatherings, remembered birthdays, and honestly, the one who kept me connected to our extended family and social circle. After she passed in April of 2023, I noticed the phone calls from relatives became less frequent, but I figured everyone was just giving me space to grieve. People don't know what to say to a widower, especially when the marriage was as close as ours had been. Margaret used to joke that we were like an old married couple even when we were newlyweds. We just fit together perfectly. Jake, my 38-year-old son, had married Madison Clark 3 years earlier, in 2021. Madison was a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm downtown, always impeccably dressed, always taking photos for her social media accounts. She had what I'd call expensive tastes: designer purse, newest iPhone model, luxury car lease, constantly talking about renovating their house or planning their next vacation to some exotic destination I'd never heard of. At first, I attributed her behavior to generational differences. She was 35, ambitious, and came from a family where success was measured in visible achievements. Her parents were wealthy, or at least appeared to be, and she'd grown up expecting a certain lifestyle. But over the past 2 years, particularly after Margaret's diagnosis became serious, I started noticing patterns that my detective training had taught me to recognize. Madison would steer conversations away from my work stories, especially anything related to my detective experience or cases I'd solved. When I'd tell stories about financial fraud investigations or elder abuse cases I'd worked, she'd change the subject or make comments about how depressing it must have been to deal with criminals all the time. She'd make little comments about my memory. "Oh, Christian's getting forgetful," or "You know how older people can be about technology," or "Christian, didn't we just talk about this last week?" Jake would just smile uncomfortably and change the subject. But I started keeping track of these incidents because something felt off about them. The isolation was gradual, almost surgical in its precision. Family barbecues happened less often. Holiday gatherings got smaller. When I'd call Jake directly, Madison would often answer and explain that he was busy, stressed from work, dealing with a big project, couldn't talk long. I started keeping a log, an old habit from my detective days, and realized I'd gone from talking to my son 3 times a week to maybe once every 2 weeks. Margaret had always been the family communicator, so I told myself this was normal. People drift apart when the central organizing person is gone. But deep down, something felt calculated about the way these changes were happening. I'd catch Madison looking at me sometimes with this expression I couldn't quite read, not hostile, but evaluating, like she was measuring something or calculating some kind of timeline. The most unsettling part was how Madison would advocate for my well-being in ways that felt intrusive rather than caring. "Christian, you shouldn't be handling all these finances alone," she'd say during family dinners. "What if something happens to you? What if you make a mistake? Jake and I should be more involved in understanding your financial situation." When I'd explained that I was perfectly capable of managing my own money, after all, I'd been doing it successfully for 40 years of marriage, she'd get this concerned look and say things like, "But Christian, you're under a lot of stress. Grief can affect judgment. We just want to make sure you're protected." The breaking point came on December 15th, 2024. I was paying bills online, something I'd been doing for over a decade, when I logged into my Wells Fargo checking account, number 4582. The balance showed $53,247. I stared at the screen for a full minute, thinking there had to be some technical glitch with the website. 2 weeks earlier, that account had contained $180,000. My hands were actually shaking as I scrolled through the transaction history. What I saw made my blood run cold. 3 wire transfers, all recent, all substantial. November 28th, $45,000 transferred to an account belonging to Madison Clark Morris. December 3rd, $52,000 to the same account. December 10th, $30,000 to the same account. Total, $127,000 of my money transferred without my knowledge or authorization. I immediately called the bank's fraud hotline. My detective training kicking in as I documented everything: times, amounts, reference numbers. The representative, a patient woman named Sarah, walked me through the recent transactions in detail. "These transfers were authorized using your online banking credentials, Mr. Morris," Sarah explained. "The security questions were answered correctly, and the transfers show proper authentication protocol was followed." "I didn't authorize any of these transfers," I said firmly. "I didn't even know my daughter-in-law's account information." "Sir, I understand your concern, but the transfers show proper authentication. However, if you believe this is unauthorized access, we can immediately freeze the account and start a fraud investigation. I should warn you that this process can take several weeks, and we'll need to document everything thoroughly." I requested the immediate freeze and started the fraud claim process. But I knew, with the certainty that comes from decades of investigating financial crimes, that this wasn't some random hacker who'd gotten lucky with my personal information. This was someone who had my banking credentials, my security question answers, my trust, and my access to my personal information. That evening, Jake called around dinner time. "Dad, Madison and I would like to come over tonight. We need to have a family meeting about some important issues." His voice sounded strained, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. "What kind of issues, Jake?" "Just some family financial matters we need to discuss. We'll be there around 7. And they arrived exactly on time, Madison carrying a folder of documents and wearing what I'd come to recognize as her serious conversation outfit: conservative dress, minimal jewelry, the appearance of someone responsible and trustworthy. "Christian, we heard from the bank that you've been having some issues with your account," Madison said, settling into Margaret's favorite chair with practiced familiarity. "We're worried about you managing everything alone, especially during this difficult time." I decided to be direct. I had $127,000 stolen from my account. The bank says it was transferred to Madison's account over the past few weeks. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Madison didn't even blink. "Dad, you asked us to help with some expenses," Jake said quietly. "You said you wanted to contribute to our down payment for the new house we're looking at. Don't you remember having that conversation?" I felt the ground shifting under me, but my detective training kicked in immediately. When someone's story doesn't match the facts, when they're gaslighting you about events you know didn't happen, you document everything and trust your evidence over their words. "Show me where I authorized $127,000 in transfers," I said calmly. "Show me emails, text messages, signed documents, anything that proves I agreed to this." Madison pulled out her phone with confidence. "You called me on November 25th, remember? You were feeling emotional about missing Margaret, and you said you'd been thinking about your legacy, about how to help family while you're still here. You said you wanted to transfer some money to help us get started on our new house, and you said it made more sense than leaving it sitting in your account, earning minimal interest." The gaslighting was so smooth, so confident, delivered with such apparent sincerity that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. Almost. But I keep a daily log, a habit I developed during my detective career to keep track of cases, appointments, and important events. On November 25th, 2024, I was at my cardiologist's office all morning for my annual checkup, then spent the afternoon at Laurel Hill Cemetery visiting Margaret's gravesite. I never called anyone that day except my brother Marcus to update him my medical appointment. Madison, I have detailed records of everything I did that day. I never called you about transferring money. I never had any conversation with anyone about giving you $127,000. Madison's expression shifted slightly, but she maintained her concerned tone. Christian, this is exactly what we're worried about. Memory issues, confusion about recent conversations, difficulty keeping track of financial decisions. It's completely normal for someone your age, especially someone dealing with grief and stress. Jake nodded supportively. Dad, we're not trying to upset you. We're trying to help. Maybe it would be easier if Madison and I took more responsibility for managing some of your financial affairs. You mean like power of attorney? Exactly, Madison said, brightening as if I'd finally understood something obvious. We've actually brought some preliminary paperwork for you to look at. Nothing binding, just an exploration of options that might give you peace of mind. That's when I realized they had no idea they were trying to run a financial scam on someone who'd spent 3 decades investigating financial scams. They thought they were dealing with a confused, grief-stricken old man. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who'd put dozens of financial predators in prison. That night, after they left, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to investigate my own family the same way I'd investigate any financial crime that crossed my desk during my career. The emotional pain of being betrayed by people I loved would have to wait. Right now, I needed to gather evidence and build a case. The next morning, I drove to my old precinct in South Philadelphia and had coffee with Detective Ray Sullivan, my former partner and one of the few people I trusted completely. Ray was 2 years from retirement himself, but sharp as ever, with the same instincts that had made us effective partners for over a decade. I explained the situation without emotion, laying out just the facts. Unauthorized transfers, gaslighting about conversations that never happened, pressure to sign power of attorney documents, systematic isolation from family members who might question unusual financial activities. Chris, what you're describing is textbook elder financial abuse, Ray said immediately. In Pennsylvania, that's a felony that can carry serious prison time. The systematic nature of it, the psychological manipulation, the isolation tactics, this isn't amateur hour, but you're going to need solid evidence that will hold up in court. Ray helped me understand my legal options. In Pennsylvania, I could legally record phone conversations as long as I was a party to the conversation. It's called one-party consent law. He gave me the name of Helen Westbrook, an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and had worked with law enforcement on several successful prosecutions. But Chris, Ray warned as we finished our coffee, investigating family is different than investigating strangers. You sure you want to know what you're going to find? Because once you start pulling this thread, you might unravel more than you're prepared for. I was sure. I'd rather know the truth than live as a victim. Over the next week, I did what I do best. I gathered intelligence systematically and methodically. I contacted Helen Westbrook, who reviewed our family's financial arrangements and confirmed something crucial that Madison and Jake had no idea about. The irrevocable trust Margaret and I had established 6 months before her death was still intact and completely protected. That trust contained $850,000, the bulk of our life savings, including proceeds from Margaret's life insurance policy and the sale of some rental property we'd owned. Madison and Jake had only accessed my checking and savings accounts, which I deliberately kept at a lower balance for day-to-day expenses. Christian, Helen explained during our meeting, an irrevocable trust means even you can't touch that money without meeting specific conditions. Your beneficiaries were designated as your children, but the trust includes strict guidelines about demonstrating care for your well-being and prohibitions against financial exploitation. I also hired Tom Bradley, a private investigator Ray recommended, who specialized in financial background checks. Tom was expensive at $150 per hour, but within 3 days, he provided information that changed my understanding of the entire situation. Madison Clark and Morris had accumulated $180,000 in cryptocurrency trading losses over the past 18 months. She'd been using borrowed money, credit card and personal loans to fund increasingly desperate attempts to recover her losses through high-risk trading. Her social media lifestyle was completely financed through debt. Furthermore, Tom discovered that Jake had been experiencing financial pressure at his job as an accountant for Hartwell Construction. There were irregularities in the books that suggested he might be embezzling money to cover household expenses that his salary couldn't support. The pieces started forming a clear picture. Madison needed money desperately to cover her cryptocurrency losses and avoid financial ruin. She'd systematically isolated me from family members who might question unusual financial activities. She'd been setting up a narrative about my declining mental capacity to justify taking control of my finances. And now she'd orchestrated what she thought was the perfect theft. Taking money from someone she'd convinced everyone was becoming incompetent to manage his own affairs. But she had one crucial problem. I had 30 years of experience investigating people exactly like her. I decided to set a trap. On December 20th, I called Madison's cell phone directly, with the legal recording app Ray had helped me install, running in the background. The conversation that followed exceeded even my expectations for how incriminating it would be. "Madison, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," I said, keeping my tone neutral and slightly confused. "About the money transfers and everything." "Oh, Christian, I'm so glad you called," she said warmly, her voice full of practiced concern. "I was actually worried you were still confused about everything that happened. How are you feeling today? I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. You're saying I authorized moving $127,000 from my Wells Fargo account to your personal account?" "Of course you did, honey. You called me several times about it over the past month. You said you'd been thinking about how to help Jake and me with our future, and that the money was just sitting there anyway, not earning much interest. You were very clear that you wanted to do this while you could see us benefit from your generosity." The casual way she lied with such complete confidence was breathtaking, but I needed to push further to get the kind of evidence that would be useful in court. "Madison, can I ask you something honestly, something that's been on my mind?" "Anything, Christian. We're family." "Do you think I have many years left? I mean, realistically, given my age and health situation?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear her calculating her response. Then she laughed, not unkindly, but with a casualness that sent chills down my spine. "Christian, I think we need to be realistic about things. You're 65. You've been through tremendous stress with Margaret's illness and death, and you're showing some signs of, well, cognitive changes that are normal for someone your age. Honestly, I'd say 5 years, maybe 7 if you really take care of yourself. That's exactly why it makes sense to help family now, while you can see us benefit from your generosity, instead of just leaving everything tied up in legal processes after you're gone." I kept my voice steady, almost shaky, playing the role she expected. "So, in your medical opinion, I'll be dead within 5 to 7 years? I'm not trying to be morbid, honey. I'm just being realistic. Your health isn't great. Your blood pressure, the heart issues, the way you've been forgetting things lately. Jake and I need this money now to build our lives together, to start a family, to establish ourselves financially. You'll be gone anyway, so why not help us while you're here to see how much it means to us?" The recording was capturing everything: her tone, her reasoning, her complete lack of concern for my well-being, her casual discussion of my death as if it were a foregone conclusion that should factor into current financial decisions. But then she said something that shocked even me, something that revealed the full scope of their plan. "Can I be completely honest with you about something else, Christian? Please. Jake was worried about telling you this directly, but we've been noticing some concerning things when we've been helping you organize your paperwork and finances. Some bills you'd apparently forgotten to pay, some confused transactions, difficulty remembering conversations we'd had about important topics. We think it might be time to seriously consider having someone else handle your financial responsibilities entirely. Someone you trust, like family. You mean like giving someone power of attorney over my finances? Exactly. Jake and I have been talking about it extensively, and we think it would actually give you tremendous peace of mind. You wouldn't have to worry about making mistakes with money, forgetting important payments, or making decisions you might regret later. We could handle all your financial decisions going forward, and you could just focus on enjoying your remaining time without all that stress and responsibility. There it was, the end game. They weren't just planning to steal $127,000 from me. They were planning to take complete legal control of all my finances, probably transfer everything into accounts they controlled, and leave me completely dependent on their goodwill for basic living expenses. I ended the call politely, thanking Madison for her honesty and telling her I'd think about everything she'd said. Then I immediately called Ray Sullivan and asked him to meet me that evening. When I played the recording for Ray, his expression grew darker with each passing minute. By the end, he was taking notes and shaking his head. Chris, this is one of the clearest cases of premeditated elder abuse I've ever heard. She just confessed to systematic financial exploitation, and she laid out their entire plan for future crimes. We need to get this to the district attorney's office immediately. The next phase of my investigation was about to begin, and Madison and Jake had no idea they just provided me with everything I needed to destroy them legally. 2 days later, Jake called with an ultimatum that shattered whatever hope I'd had left for salvaging our relationship. His voice was strained and formal, like he was reading from a script someone else had written and rehearsed with him multiple times. Dad, Madison and I have talked extensively about the situation, and we need to clear the air about everything that's been happening. We think the stress of Mom's death has affected your judgment and memory more than you're willing to admit. Jake, please let me finish. This is important, and I need you to really listen to what I'm saying. You've accused us of stealing from you, which is not only false, but deeply hurtful. You've been paranoid and suspicious about our efforts to help you, and frankly, your behavior is becoming damaging to our family relationships. Madison is genuinely hurt by your accusations. I'm hurt by your lack of trust in us, and we can't continue walking on eggshells around your unfounded suspicions and accusations. I stayed quiet, letting him continue, even though every word felt like a knife. So here's what needs to happen if we're going to move forward as a family. You need to apologize to Madison for accusing her of lying and stealing money from you. You need to acknowledge that your memory of recent events isn't reliable and that we've been trying to help you through a difficult time. And you need to seriously consider signing power of attorney documents so we can help protect your finances from future confusion and mistakes. The calculated cruelty of the ultimatum took my breath away. And if I don't agree to those conditions? The pause was long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. When Jake spoke again, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard from him before. Then Madison and I are done, Dad. We can't have you in our lives if you're going to treat us like criminals when we're trying to help you. You'll be completely alone, with no family support, no one to help you when your health gets worse, no one to check on you or care about your well-being. The threat was expertly designed for maximum psychological impact. They'd systematically isolated me from other family members over the past 2 years, and now they were threatening to complete that isolation unless I submitted to their financial control. Jake, do you hear what you're actually saying to me? You're threatening to abandon me completely unless I let you take control of my money and apologize for objecting when you stole from me? We didn't steal anything. We've been trying to help you manage money. You were going to lose anyway through poor decisions or forgetting to pay bills. We're trying to be responsible family members, and you're being paranoid and ungrateful. I raised you to be better than this. You raised me to respect family and to take care of people I love. Right now, you're not acting like the father I respect, and you're making it impossible for us to take care of you. I realized in that moment that they'd calculated this perfectly. An elderly widower, increasingly isolated from extended family, financially vulnerable, with adult children positioned as concerned caregivers, trying to protect him from his own declining faculties. To anyone looking from the outside, their story would be completely believable. Worried family members trying to help a confused, paranoid father who was becoming difficult and ungrateful. They'd created the perfect setup for legal financial abuse, complete with a narrative that would make me look like the problem if I tried to seek help or legal intervention. I need time to think about what you've said, Jake. You have 24 hours, Dad. After that, don't call us, don't come by our house, don't try to contact Madison. We'll be done with you permanently. The line went dead. I sat in my empty house, surrounded by 40 years of marriage memories and family photographs, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt truly alone. The people I'd loved and raised and sacrificed for were not only willing to steal from me, they were willing to destroy me emotionally if I didn't submit to being robbed. But then I remembered something my old partner Ray used to say during particularly difficult cases. When the criminals think they've got you cornered, when they're feeling confident and making demands, that's when you spring the trap. That's when their arrogance makes them sloppy. I picked up my phone and called Helen Westbrook, my estate attorney. It was time to remind my family that I hadn't survived 30 years investigating criminals by being naive or easy to manipulate. They thought they were dealing with a helpless victim. They had no idea what they had just walked into. Helen Westbrook's office felt like a sanctuary when I walked in on December 27th, carrying a folder full of evidence I'd gathered over the past week. She'd been handling estate planning for Margaret and me since 2020, and she understood our family dynamics better than anyone outside our immediate circle. Christian, I've been expecting your call since we talked about the trust situation, she said as we settled into her conference room. Tell me everything that's happened since our last conversation. I laid out the entire situation methodically. The unauthorized bank transfers, the systematic gaslighting about conversations that never happened, Jake's ultimatum, the pressure to sign power of attorney documents, and most importantly, the recorded conversation where Madison revealed her true intentions and timeline for my death. Helen listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, reviewing her notes and considering the legal implications. Christian, this is textbook elder financial abuse, but it's also one of the most sophisticated cases I've seen. The psychological manipulation, the isolation tactics, the systematic undermining of your credibility. This shows significant planning and premeditation, but we have several advantages they don't know about. She pulled out a thick folder containing documents I'd forgotten about in my grief over Margaret's death. First, the irrevocable trust we established 6 months before Margaret passed contains $850,000 of your primary assets. Neither Jake nor Madison has any legal access to those funds under any circumstances. The trust specifies that money is only available to you for healthcare and living expenses, and upon your death, it goes to your children, but only if they meet very specific conditions. What kind of conditions? They have to demonstrate that they've maintained a supportive, non-exploitative relationship with you. They must have visited regularly, provided emotional support, and most importantly, they cannot have engaged in any financial exploitation or abuse. The trust specifically states that any child who commits elder abuse or financial crimes against you forfeits their inheritance entirely. For the first time in weeks, I felt something resembling hope. Second, Helen continued, the power of attorney documents they want you to sign would be legally invalid due to the duress and fraud involved in obtaining them. Pennsylvania law is very clear that POA agreements signed under threat or coercion are void. What's our next legal step? Helen smiled with the confidence of someone who'd fought and won these battles before. We're going to give them enough rope to hang themselves legally. I'm going to call them today and suggest a family meeting to discuss your concerns about the power of attorney arrangement. We'll present it as you being willing to consider their proposal after thinking it over. Why would we want them to think I'm giving in? Because I want them to commit their fraud in front of witnesses on the record with full legal documentation of their criminal intent. We're going to let them think they've won right up until the moment they realize they've confessed to multiple felonies. And that afternoon, Helen called Jake and Madison, explaining that I was reconsidering my position after our difficult conversation and wanted to meet to work things out as a family. The meeting was scheduled for December 30th at Helen's office. They sounded very pleased, Helen reported after the call. Madison specifically asked if you'd be signing documents during the meeting and whether they should bring their own power of attorney paperwork. The trap was set perfectly. I spent the next 3 days preparing with Helen, Ray Sullivan, and Tom Bradley. Ray confirmed that the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office was very interested in the case. Elder financial abuse had become a major priority, and they had dedicated resources for investigation and prosecution. Tom's investigation had continued to uncover damaging information about Madison and Jake's financial situation. Madison had made several large cash deposits totaling $89,000 over the past month, and when we cross-referenced the dates, they perfectly matched the timeline when Jake would have received the money Madison had transferred from my accounts. But here's what Jake didn't know. Those deposits were from his embezzlement at Hartwell Construction. Tom's background check revealed that Jake had been systematically stealing money from his employer to cover Madison's cryptocurrency losses and maintain their lifestyle. The beautiful irony was that Jake had been stealing from his employer to give money to Madison, who then convinced him they needed to steal from me to cover the money he'd already stolen from his job. It was a house of cards built on multiple crimes, and we were about to knock down the entire structure. December 30th arrived cold and clear, with that crystalline winter light that makes everything seem sharper and more defined. Helen's conference room felt formal and serious, exactly the right setting for what was about to unfold. Jake and Madison arrived precisely at 2 p.m., Madison carrying a leather folder that presumably contained power of attorney documents they'd prepared. I was already seated with Helen when they walked in, and I could see the confidence in Madison's posture, the relief in Jake's expression. They thought this meeting was their victory lap. Ray Sullivan was positioned in the adjacent room with recording equipment and legal authorization to document everything. What Jake and Madison didn't know was that this wasn't just a family meeting. It was the final stage of a criminal investigation. Helen began with standard legal formalities, explaining the purpose of the meeting and confirming everyone's consent to being recorded for legal documentation purposes. Madison and Jake agreed readily, probably thinking this was routine paperwork for power of attorney processing. "Now," Helen said, consulting her notes, "Madison and Jake, please explain your concerns about Christian's financial management capabilities and your proposed solution." Madison leaned forward with practiced confidence. "Christian has been making some very concerning financial decisions lately. Forgetting about significant transactions, getting confused about money, he's authorized us to use for legitimate family purposes, even accusing us of theft when we were following his explicit instructions. We believe it would be in his best interest if Jake and I handled his finances through a comprehensive power of attorney arrangement." "Can you provide specific examples of these concerning decisions?" Helen asked, pen poised over her legal pad. "Well, he authorized transfers totaling $127,000 to help us with our house purchase and future planning, then completely forgot about making those authorizations. When he saw the transactions on his bank statements, he accused us of stealing from him, which was both hurtful and demonstrated significant memory issues." Jake nodded supportively. "We're genuinely worried about Dad living alone and making financial mistakes that could seriously hurt his long-term security. We think professional management of his finances would protect him from poor decisions." Helen made careful notes. "And exactly how much money are we discussing in these transactions?" "Christian transferred $127,000 to us over the course of several weeks in November and December," Madison said with complete confidence. "It was entirely his idea, his generous gift to help us establish our financial foundation as a young married couple." "I see. And what would your specific role be as power of attorney holders?" This was the crucial moment where their criminal intent would become undeniable. Madison straightened in her chair, clearly feeling confident about explaining their plan. "We would handle all of Christian's financial decisions going forward. Bill payments, investment management, healthcare expenses, daily living costs, essentially complete financial oversight to protect him from confusion and poor judgment. Would that include access to all of Christian's bank accounts and investment assets? Absolutely. That's the entire point of comprehensive power of attorney. We'd need complete financial control to effectively protect his interests and ensure his money is managed responsibly. Helen glanced at me, then back at Madison. And what if Christian objected to specific financial decisions you made on his behalf? Madison's expression shifted slightly, revealing something harder underneath the concerned facade. Helen, that's precisely why power of attorney exists. When someone has diminished cognitive capacity, they can't be allowed to make decisions that might harm their own financial security or override responsible management. So you're stating for the record that you believe Christian lacks the mental capacity to manage his own finances? Yes, Madison said firmly without hesitation. His recent behavior clearly demonstrates cognitive decline that makes independent financial management dangerous for his well-being. And you would have complete discretion over all financial decisions, regardless of his preferences or objections? That's exactly what power of attorney means, Jake added. Complete financial authority to protect him from himself. Helen opened her own folder and slid documents across the table. That's very interesting because I have some legal documents here that might complicate your proposal considerably. I looked directly at Madison. These are the papers establishing an irrevocable trust containing $850,000, the actual bulk of my assets. That trust was created 6 months before you started your systematic campaign to steal from me. The silence in the room stretched for nearly 15 seconds. I watched Madison's face go through several distinct changes: confusion, disbelief, then growing alarm as the implications became clear. "What are you talking about?" she said quietly. Helen continued with devastating legal precision. The irrevocable trust places Christian's primary assets completely beyond the reach of any power of attorney arrangement. Additionally, the trust contains very specific language about elder abuse that automatically disqualifies any beneficiary who commits financial crimes against the grantor. Jake was staring at the trust documents like they were written in a foreign language. "Dad, I don't understand. You said you needed our help managing all your money." "I never said that, Jake. Madison said that. Just like Madison claimed, I authorized $127,000 in transfers that I never approved." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "Helen, would you please play the recording from December 20th? Helen activated the conference room's audio system. Madison's voice filled the room, clear and utterly damning. "Christian, you're 65 and you've been through tremendous stress. Honestly, I'd say 5 years, maybe 7 if you really take care of yourself. That's exactly why it makes sense to help family now. While you can see us benefit from your generosity, instead of just leaving everything tied up in legal processes after you're gone. You'll be gone anyway, so why not help us while you're here?" Jake's face crumpled as he heard his wife's casual discussion of my death as a financial planning opportunity. The recording continued with Madison's proposal for complete financial control. "We think it might be time to seriously consider having someone else handle your financial responsibilities entirely. You wouldn't have to worry about making mistakes with money, forgetting important payments, or making decisions you might regret later. We could handle all your financial decisions going forward." When the recording ended, Madison was staring at the speaker with her mouth slightly open, all pretense of concern and family love completely gone. "You recorded me? You secretly recorded a private family conversation? Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state," Helen explained calmly. "Christian had every legal right to record conversations he participated in, especially when investigating potential crimes against himself." Madison stood up abruptly, her composure completely shattered. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove we did anything wrong. That conversation was taken completely out of context." "Actually," Helen said, opening another folder, "we can prove quite a lot." She spread out documents systematically. "We have bank records showing unauthorized transfers totaling $127,000. We have documentation of the systematic isolation campaign you've conducted against Christian over the past 2 years. We have evidence of your cryptocurrency trading losses exceeding $180,000, which provided the motive for your financial desperation. Ray Sullivan chose that precise moment to enter the conference room, his badge clearly visible. Madison Clark Morris, Jake Morris, I'm Detective Ray Sullivan with the Philadelphia Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I'm here to inform you that you're both under investigation for elder financial abuse, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and in Jake's case, embezzlement from your employer. Madison's legs gave out, and she sat down heavily in her chair. This isn't possible. We're family. We were trying to help him. Ma'am, we have recorded evidence of your intent to defraud an elderly person, documentation of unauthorized financial transfers exceeding $100,000, and evidence of systematic psychological manipulation designed to facilitate ongoing financial abuse. Ray turned to Jake, his expression showing disappointment rather than anger. Son, we also know about the embezzlement at Hartwell Construction. We know you've been stealing money from your employer to cover your wife's gambling debts and maintain a lifestyle your salary couldn't support. Jake made a choking sound. How could you possibly know about that? We're detectives, Jake. Financial crimes leave trails, and we're very good at following them. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months, and saw a broken man who'd been led step by step into serious criminality by someone he loved and trusted. For just a moment, I felt something like pity for the choices he'd made. Then I remembered his ultimatum, his willingness to abandon me completely unless I submitted to being robbed legally. Jake, I said quietly, you had a choice at every single step. You chose to steal from your employer. You chose to help steal from me. You chose to gaslight me about my own memory. You chose to threaten me with complete abandonment unless I let you continue stealing from me. These weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. These were calculated decisions. Madison suddenly exploded with rage. You manipulative old bastard! You set us up! You pretended to be weak and confused and helpless. I observed, I replied calmly. I documented. I investigated. I built a case, just like I did for 30 years, when criminals thought they were smarter than the law. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my home office, but everything about this house feels different now. It's been transformed from a place of isolation and vulnerability into something else entirely, a headquarters for what's become my new purpose in life. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once Ray and the district attorney's office had all the evidence we'd gathered. Madison was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for elder abuse and wire fraud. The judge was particularly harsh about the psychological manipulation and the premeditated nature of her 2-year campaign to isolate me and steal from me. She'll be eligible for parole in 18 months, but she'll have a federal felony record that will follow her for the rest of her life. Jake received 2 years in state prison, with the possibility of early release after 14 months if he completes full restitution to both his former employer and to me. The embezzlement charges were actually more serious than the elder abuse charges because they involved systematic theft over a longer period. The full $127,000 was recovered from Madison's accounts, plus penalties and interest that brought the total restitution to nearly $140,000. But the legal victory was only part of what needed to happen. The court proceedings exposed the entire systematic abuse publicly, creating a permanent record that will protect other elderly people from similar schemes. The case was covered by local media as an example of sophisticated elder abuse, and several other families came forward with similar experiences. I've started working with the Elder Justice Coalition, a nonprofit organization that trains seniors to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation and family abuse. It turns out my detective skills translate perfectly to this new kind of work. I teach monthly workshops on how to document suspicious behaviors, how to protect assets legally before problems develop, and most importantly, how to trust your instincts when family members start pushing for financial control. The cryptocurrency losses that drove Madison's initial desperation turned out to be just the tip of an iceberg. During the investigation, we discovered she'd been living a completely fabricated lifestyle for over 3 years, borrowing against credit cards, taking personal loans, even stealing from her employer's petty cash fund, all while maintaining the appearance of success on social media. Her entire adult life was built on lies and debt. Jake was so completely manipulated that he genuinely believed he was helping solve temporary family financial problems through his theft from Hartwell Construction. The psychological control Madison exercised over him was almost as disturbing as her financial crimes against me. I've also started dating someone I met through grief counseling, a widow named Patricia whose husband died 3 years ago. She has her own stories about family members who suddenly became very interested in her finances after her husband's death, though thankfully she recognized the warning signs before any actual theft occurred. We take things slowly, but there's something healing about building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than dependency or financial interest. My brother Marcus and I have rebuilt our relationship completely. He told me that Madison had contacted him multiple times over the past 2 years, subtly suggesting that I was becoming forgetful and might need family intervention soon. She'd systematically worked to poison my relationships with anyone who might question her eventual financial control. Those family connections are slowly being restored now that people understand what actually happened. The irrevocable trust remains intact and will continue to be managed exactly as Margaret and I planned. The portion that would have been Jake's inheritance has been redirected to elder abuse prevention organizations with a legal provision that Jake can earn back his share through demonstrated rehabilitation and genuine amends over a period of at least 5 years. I'm not holding my breath about family reconciliation, but I do believe in the possibility of redemption for people who are willing to do the hard work of acknowledging what they've done and making real changes.